Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. In recent years, we've seen some strong leaders on the rise in places like Russia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. But what about Europe? Did you know that your Bible talks about a fierce and powerful king who's going to rise to power in Europe and shock the whole world? It's one of the most astonishing prophecies in all the Bible. On today's program, we'll examine this prophecy and see how closely it connects to the return of Jesus Christ to this earth.
The Trumpet Daily.
I have said, my friends, and been saying all along, that there will be a United States of Europe, that Europe is going to unite, and that there will be a union of church and state in Europe, and there will be one great super government there, and it will be fascist in its system.
That was a short clip from Herbert W. Armstrong's old radio program from the 1960s. He made that statement well over 60 years ago. Now, on this program, we've often talked about what we call Mr. Armstrong's signature prophecy, how that 10 kings will arise out of Europe and give their power to Germany. And if you can believe it, that's something Mr. Armstrong prophesied about as far back as the 1940s, even when Germany was literally in rubble. Anyone familiar with Herbert Armstrong's teachings instantly remembers his many articles, booklets, radio programs, and television shows about the prophesied seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. And he was really specific in what he said about that final resurrection, that 10 kings would rise out of Europe, that Germany would be the unchallenged and dominant power, that Britain would not be part of that union, and that this prophesied beast power would be led by what he called a confidence-inspiring leader. Now, to give that kind of forecast today or last week is one thing, but 60 or 70 years ago, a lot of what he was saying back then has just been fulfilled in the last few years or so. Now, we're still waiting for the 10 specific kings to emerge. The union, as it is today, will likely go through a period of dramatic readjustment in the months and years ahead, but that transformation may well take shape once the prophesied strongman appears to lead this new European superpower. That's what your Bible prophesies. Let's start our study today in Revelation chapter 17. Revelation 17 describes the seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, the resurrection that's happening right now. Actually, as we get into verse 8 here, there's some also about the sixth resurrection during that World War II era. Verse 8, it says here, "The beast that you saw was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wander, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is." So that's talking, as I say, about the sixth head. But where it says, "and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit," that's talking about the seventh and final resurrection. This prophecy here, it talks about the peaks and the valleys, how that you have this resurrection and then it goes into a pit for a time, or it goes underground, as Mr. Armstrong used to say. But it's re-emerging now. And we're seeing the seventh and final resurrection. It's interesting that bottomless pit phrase there. It comes from the Greek word abyss, which again is underground. And as I say, Mr. Armstrong talked often about that. Verse 9 says, "And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits." Now we're picking it up in the middle of the chapter, but you can go back through some of our other materials and study more about this woman straddling the beast. We'll reserve that study for a later program. But here it talks about the mountains. As I say, you have the mountains and then you have the valleys. You have the peaks and the valleys. And so there's a period or a lull, let's say, after World War II, when you look at Europe and you see a relatively peaceful time, 10, 15, 20, well, more than that, 50, 60, 70 years. A lot of that, of course, was maintained because of the NATO alliance and because of the American superpower. But now we see the world going through some dramatic changes, and those changes are happening in Europe as well. Verse 10, and there are 7 kings, it says. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. And so it's talking here, Mr. Armstrong, as I've explained before, he came on the scene when that 6th resurrection was happening. He witnessed it. He talked about it. He prophesied about it. And then as soon as that 6th head left the scene, he immediately started prophesying about the 7th and final resurrection. He said there's going to be another reemergence of this Holy Roman Empire coming right out of the heart of Europe. Now, it's not going to last for very long. It says there it continues just for a short space. And then you go and look at the next verse, or we'll skip down to verse 12. It says, and the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Again, so it's a short-lived period that we're talking about here. But these 10 kings, this is talking about the United States of Europe. So Europe, it's probably going to be rebooted in the months ahead. But still, what you see there, and the comments that you see coming out of the European Union, and the fact that Britain is on the way out, these are all significant developments. And next we can look for those 10 heads of state to come together. We can look for more of a core Europe to come together. And then, of course, the strongman. But looking at these 10, this is something that, as I say, Mr. Armstrong talked about for years, for decades, in fact. He specifically used the terms, the United States of Europe. And as it happens, just last week, you saw that exact headline here in the Daily Telegraph, the United States of Europe. That's what they're talking about now. That's what the EU Commissioner was talking about. The United States of Europe. That's something that Herbert Armstrong spoke of back in the 50s and 60s. In fact, I have a headline here, I think, from this is 1963, I believe. It's from the Plain Truth magazine. This is Herbert Armstrong's magazine that he started 3 years ahead of schedule, the United States of Europe. That's from the Plain Truth magazine from way back. Well, here the Telegraph's writing about it now because, this reaction, it's the State of the Union. That's what went on last week. And the EU Commissioner gets up there and says, look, the Britain's moving out and they're going to regret it. And we're going to come together stronger than ever before. And we're going to have a unified military force. And we're going to have a strong and robust foreign policy. And we're going to have a stronger economic union. And here the Telegraph is writing about the United States of Europe. There was a headline down in Australia in the Australasian or Australian.com. It said the EU superstate will rise the day after Brexit. Now again, there may be some here in Britain even that don't take this seriously. They just think, it's just a lot of talk coming from Brussels. But what does your Bible say? What does your Bible prophesy? Mr. Armstrong, in his last book, Mystery of the Ages, he was talking about these prophecies, Revelation 17, and connecting them to Revelation 13 and Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. And he talked about the United States of Europe that's now forming out of the European common market. It started as just a common market, then it was the European Union, and soon it will be the United States of Europe. And you'll see those 10 kings emerge, and you'll see one strong man come to center stage to lead the project, to lead this new superpower. It's all laid out in the Bible. He says Revelation 17:12 makes plain the detail that it shall be a union of 10 kings or kingdoms that shall resurrect the old Roman Empire. Now, it's going to be a great shock to this world when it finally does emerge and everyone can see it there. But that's all part of the prophecy, as Mr. Armstrong explains here in this next clip.
But today it becomes a very solemn warning. And now the time is very imminent. The new United States of Europe is on the verge of going together. Now, it has gone together a number of times. Already, well, 5 times directly and a 6th time that the world hardly noticed. And we're waiting now for the 7th resurrection of the Roman Empire. And the whole world is going to be astounded.
The whole world is going to be astounded. As he said there at the end of that clip, that was from a message he gave in 1982, decades ago. Here again, as I say, I mean, people may look at this headline, the United States of Europe. One politician here in Britain said, well, I'm glad we're leaving, if that's the way they're thinking. I'm glad we're leaving. And there's others, I say, that brush it aside. Well, it's just a big bureaucracy. It moves slow. It's not really a threat. They can't ever agree on anything. But that too is prophesied. Daniel 2, those 10 toes, a mixture of iron and clay. I've gone through that before as well. But look, what does your Bible say? What does your Bible prophesy? When you start seeing headlines like that, particularly when they match up with ones like that we were talking about 50, 60 years ago, it's time to sit up and take note. And it's all going to come together so quickly, like he brought out in that clip I just played. It's going to happen fast. And then the world's going to be astounded as they're looking at this old Roman Empire. It's reemerged. It's come from the same territory of Europe that it's come from historically. There's the same dominant power there that we've seen even in recent history. History's repeating itself. But you see, people have been lulled to sleep during this period of relative peace in Europe since the end of World War II in 1945. We've been lulled to sleep and we think, oh, well, that could never happen again. It is happening, and it's happening fast. Verse 13 here in Revelation 17 says, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These 10, you see, they give their power and their strength to the beast. They start saying things like, well, we're going to come together then. If you're leaving, fine. You're going to pay for it. You're going to regret it. And we're going to come together stronger than ever. And you watch. Those that resist against it will be on the outside looking in. And you watch for that core to develop, that strong core, that core of 10 kingdoms. And then, as we'll discuss in the next segment, look for that one man to emerge. We'll get into that prophecy next. In fact, it's talked about in this booklet that we're offering today. A strong German leader is imminent. We haven't offered this on the program before, so if you haven't gotten it yet, make sure that you write down the information that you need so that you can call our operators or order the material online. Also, subscribe to the Trumpet magazine. Here's one from last year. Talks about that prophecy of Mr. Armstrong's, that Britain would be no part of it. We had a lot to say about that last year when Britain voted to leave, and now we see that in motion. They're on the way out. Make sure that you request this free material. There's no cost or follow-up. We'll be right back.
Strong leaders are rising fast on the world scene in China, Russia, and Iran. But what about Europe? Your Bible talks about a fiercely powerful king who is going to rise on the world scene in Europe and shock this world. It is one of the most astonishing prophecies in your Bible. A strong German leader is imminent. When he comes to power, this world will be shocked as it has never been shocked before. Your Bible describes him as a king that will enter in peaceably, obtaining his office by flatteries. He will be a skilled politician with a crafty and attractive personality. There are several signs that this strong leader is about to rise on the world scene. To learn more about this prophesied European strongman, request our free booklet, A Strong German Leader is Imminent.
The 17th chapter of the book of Revelation shows it will be a combination of 10 dictatorships in Europe going together. 10 governments or nations in Europe consolidating in the United States of Europe. I don't know whether they'll call it the Roman Empire or not, but that's what it will be.
That's Herbert Armstrong once again, speaking back in the 1960s, saying, I don't know if that's what they'll call it, the Roman Empire, but that's what it will be, that seventh and final resurrection. And those who know their history, they know this. They know this. History is repeating itself. The late Otto von Habsburg, he comes from one of the most distinguished royal lines in Europe. He said years ago, we possess a European symbol which belongs to all nations of Europe equally. All nations in Europe. He says this is the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, which embodies the tradition of Charlemagne. I mean, he knew the history. He knew the tradition that they were following in, the tradition of Charlemagne. But as you'll discover when you go through this booklet we're offering today, do you really want to go down that road again? The tradition of Charlemagne? Look back at the history. One popular blogger here in the UK, he said back in 2011, he said this several years ago, that the EU is essentially the recreation of the old empire of Charlemagne. I mean, he can see it for what it is. Okay, so it needs to be downsized and it's going to be rebooted to some extent. But he sees the history, he knows where this is leading, and really, all that it needs is that confidence-inspiring leader, as Mr. Armstrong explains in this 1954 article. He said all Europe is actually ready, just waiting for the confidence-inspiring leader. He says that man is there somewhere. I mean, he's there somewhere. He's about to emerge. I mean, we're a lot further along in the story now. Another one from back in 1953. Without Germany, such a federation of nations is impossible. It is probable that none but a German can provide the dynamic, inspired leadership required to organize such a political, military federation. Let's look over in Daniel 8. This is that fascinating prophecy that my father talks about in this booklet we're offering today. A strong German leader is imminent. Let's look at this prophecy, Daniel and chapter 8. We've got to be looking for this. This is what your Bible prophesies. Now I know this weekend there's elections going on in Germany, and we're watching those closely, and we'll see what happens in the road ahead as well. It could be that coming out of this weekend, it looks like it's just going to remain as it was. There are commentators who are saying, well, Germany's stable and strong, and this is kind of a boring election, and we'll probably just see the same leadership following this election. But in fact, Germany is restless. There's a lot of people in Germany who are not content. And even if they end up with the same leader, the same chancellor, it's what we're going to be seeing in the weeks and months and years down the road that we really need to watch. We need to watch for this strong man to emerge. There was an article from 2 years ago that we translated in our news bureau. It's from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. It said, Germans are not opposed to a friendly face in their government, but at times like this, they want and need to see a different one, a tough one. I mean, when the times are tough, when they're facing all these crises, then they want a tough leader. They want a strong leader. That's what they've opted for historically. And so it's coming. They may not happen this weekend, but this could be the beginning stages of a great transformation that we see in Europe, in Germany, right here this weekend, the weeks ahead, the months ahead. Here in Daniel 8, you can look at verse 26 in the Moffat version. God talks to his prophet and says that this vision relates to the far future. That's what he said to Daniel back when he was giving this revelation. It's for the end time. Verse 17 says much the same. It's for the time of the end. And then picking it up here in verse 18, it says, Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make you know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be. It's for the last end. That's the time that we're in right now. This period of the seventh and final resurrection. I mean, really, like my father has said before, the empire is pretty much all there. It's just waiting for the emperor. Or as he's called here in Daniel 8, it's waiting for the king. Notice verse 23. It says, "And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up." So when transgression comes to the full, we're coming to a time of world trouble like we've never seen. And at that time, it says this king of fierce countenance will emerge. And there's other verses in chapter 11 of Daniel that suggest that he's not going to be voted into power. He's going to come in by flatteries. He's going to come in peaceably. No doubt because of the crises, because of the difficulties that they're facing in Europe. There's a desperate need there for leadership, for strong leadership. And that's why we've got to know our history and also our prophecy and what God says is coming. Verse 24, "And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people." This is referring to that strong man leading that resurrected Roman Empire. And as I said at the top of the show, you look around the world today and you do see strong leaders in areas like Russia. Russia has its strong man. There's strong men in Southeast Asia. There's certainly strong men in the Middle East. Europe, right at the moment, Europe lacks that. But that's what the Europeans are going to choose or want or desire. Because when you look at the world around, it's a dangerous place. As I said, we're coming into a time of trouble. And if you look at that verse, it says, "And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power." I mean, that's another dimension to this story. The fact that there are spiritual forces working behind the scenes. Revelation 12 and verse 9, Revelation 12 and verse 12, speaking about Satan the devil being cast to this earth. I mean, that's a dimension we want to be familiar with as well. Verse 25 says, "And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many." I mean, he comes in like so many other leaders, talking about peace, talking about bringing the nations together. But what it leads to is worldwide conflict. It actually draws the whole world into this conflict. It's what Jesus prophesied as the Great Tribulation period. Daniel even, in chapter 12, we'll look at it in a moment, but let me read this to you first from Mr. Armstrong, 1969. He said, "The world appears bereft of great men, but a world-recognized strong man, in all probability, will now very soon appear. There will be 10 kings ruling 10 nations or groups of nations in the area of the once great Holy Roman Empire, but there will be one super king over the 10. That's something he said back in 1969. One super king, one strong man that presides over the 10. When he appears, you can be sure that you'll hear about it on this program or on our daily radio program, kpcg.fm. We've got a daily broadcast that keeps you right up to date with prophecies, God's prophecies. It sheds light on the events that you see happening in this world and tells you why they're happening. It happens every day at 1 o'clock here in the UK, 1 o'clock in the afternoon on weekdays. And you can listen to the live stream at kpcg.fm. Let's notice a verse over in Daniel 11. This is another one we've referred to often, Daniel 11 and verse 40. It says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with ships," and so on. I mean, here again, if you know a little bit about history, if you know about the conflict between Europe, Christian-dominated Europe, and radical Islam in the Middle East, if you know anything about the Crusades, you know that these were some bloody and violent conflicts. And there's one more crusade that's coming, and Daniel 11 and verse 40 talks about it. Once Europe has its strong leadership, and after this radical Islam in the south keeps pushing and pushing at Europe, then you're going to see Europe finally lash out. And then we're off and running into great tribulation, just as your Bible prophesies. Look at verse 1 of chapter 12. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which stands for the children of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. I mean, here again, there's spiritual powers behind these events, but a time of trouble on this earth like there's never been. That's what your Bible prophesies. And then if you look over at the end of that passage we read at the start, verse 14, they shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. I mean, this is what it's leading to. This is what all of these events are leading to. They lead right into the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. Make sure that you jot the information down and request a strong German leader is imminent. And if you haven't subscribed already, you've got to subscribe to the Trumpet magazine. There's no cost, no follow-up. Just contact our operators today and receive your free literature. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.